So imagine a 30-year-old man named Thomas Johnson who was getting ready to vote. And it was November 6, 1950. And they tell him he has to take a literacy test. And that he has to sign a certification paper for the grandfather clause. And so he signs the paper and he does the literacy test. And he ends up failing the literacy test because he did not have a good education due to the poor quality of black schools. And he ends up not being able to vote due to his grandfather not being able to vote, which I think is very unfair. And this was a reality for a lot of black people during the early 1900s, the 1700s, and the 1800s. And I believe this proves that why you should vote. You should vote because it's your civic duty to vote, and it's an obligation that you should hold dear to your nation. And also you should vote because many people died who have the right to vote. And if you don't vote, it's putting their lives in vain. And you also should vote because it can help you in the long run with choosing different things. So according to the Duval County Supervisor of Elections, voting started as early as 508 BC in ancient Greece and Rome, where they held elections to elect rulers such as the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. And during the 700 CE, which means Common Era, the Apollo King Gapola, was elected as king of medieval Bengal by feudal chieftains. And at one point, Otumera, which is present-day Tamil Nadu, used palm leaves during elections. And through the years, elections changed, and went through many changes and evolutions, till 1535, when modern voting first appeared. This is when the United States took ideas from their home countries and from places around the world to create a democracy and a better place for people. And because they came from a monarchy, which means they had a king ruling over them all, and so they wanted to make it where people had power and not just the people in charge. In 1789, the United States started to regulate voting laws. And according to the U.S. Constitution, at first only white men who owned property could vote. And that was until 1856, when a new amendment was added to the Constitution saying that all white men could vote. But this excluded black people because they didn't think that black people were civilized enough to vote because they viewed them as animals. And it wasn't until 1870 when they added the 15th Amendment that black men could vote. And the 15th Amendment said that the rights of citizens to vote could not be denied or taken away. Yet white people still ignored this and still enforced Jim Crow laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, and the grandfather clause. And in 1920, a new amendment was added which gave all women the right to vote. But even though the Constitution said that they could vote, people still ignored this and tried to find ways to keep women and black people from voting because they thought that the men should have all the power and that the women should just stay at home cleaning, cooking, and doing house chores. And in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, giving everyone the right to vote. And the voting rights was passed due to work from Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, and other black civil rights activists. And in 1971, a new amendment was added to the Constitution saying that the minimum age to vote was the age of 18, which I experienced this last year when I voted for the first time. And in 2002 is when they first called for voter ID for all new and existing voters to cut down on voter registration fraud and voting fraud. And according to the Carnegie Corporation of New York, blacks still had to fight to vote, even though the Constitution allowed them to. And they were treated bad, and voting was made very difficult. Very difficult due to several tactics used by white politicians and other people. One of these was the grandfather clause, which said you couldn't vote if your granddad couldn't vote, which applied to most African Americans because most of their grandparents were slaves, or there were people that worked on plantations, and so they never had the chance to vote or the opportunity to vote. And this was the only thing that kept them from voting. Also, there was the literacy test, which required them to be able to comprehend what they read and be able to write it down. And this kept a lot of black people and probably other races from voting due to the fact that their schooling was very poor and they didn't have a good education due to the lack of resources that their schools had, and the fact they received hand-me-down books from white schools. And another thing that kept them from being able to vote was poll taxes. I mean, they had to pay a tax to vote, which a lot of black people couldn't afford it because they didn't have money. A lot of them was working as farmers or working on plantations and doing other things, so they didn't have enough money for that. And all three of those tactics was a form of disenfranchisement, or taking away their vote from them to where they couldn't vote. And this was also a form of voter suppression, which we still experience today, from votes being thrown out and votes somehow disappearing. Disenfranchisement is being deprived of a right or privilege, especially the right to vote. And there are several keynote activists that fought for voting rights, but today I'm just going to hit on a few. First, it was Lamar Smith, who was a voting organizer and a civil rights activist who fought for black people to have voting rights. And he was killed right after a rally where he was speaking on why you should bring George Lee, who was a Baptist preacher who was murdered because he gave powerful speeches and gave and preached to his congregation and to other people that they should vote. And a fun fact is that he was the first black person to register to vote in Humphreys County. And then there was Medgar Evers, who helped thousands of black people register to vote. And after a rally and after several events, he came home one night and was assassinated by someone who did not like him because he was trying to help black people to vote. And they felt that black people shouldn't have the right to vote. And last but not least, there was Vernon Ferdinand Donner, who offered to pay the poll taxes for every black person and every person that could not pay the poll tax. And they killed him because they felt like the black people would have a leg up and would be able to vote because of it. You should vote because your one vote could sway an election, and your one vote could put it in the favor of someone else. And voting impacts your everyday life, from raising kids to working to medical bills and insurance. Voting helps decide where tax dollars go and helps end racism and inequality, and shows that the people who died protecting your civic duty and your voting rights didn't die in vain. It also helps the United States to say a democracy, because the United States would not be a true democracy if half the country could not vote. The definition of a democracy is the power to the people to be able to elect a representative to talk with them and help them in ways that they can help themselves. And voting, as I said earlier, is a civic duty, which is a responsibility that a citizen has to his country, community, or government, which includes voting, paying taxes, and jury terms.